talking about debt limit by returning to three very frightening statistics. The first is 15 trillion. That is the amount of household wealth that a leading economist recently warned could be wiped out of the economy should the government default on its debt. The second is 6 million. That's the number of jobs that the same analysis said could be lost should a default become a reality. The third statistic is 9%. That's the unemployment rate our country potentially faces if we don't do our jobs to raise the debt ceiling. Now, none of these statistics, none of these numbers need become a reality if both parties unite in the coming days to pass the continuing resolution sent to us by the House. It would keep the government open for 3 months. It would provide funding for disaster relief and Afghan refugees. And of course, it would suspend the debt ceiling until the end of 2022, so we can pay for the debt incurred at the end of the previous administration. Every single member of this chamber is going to go on record as to whether they support keeping the government open and averting a default, or support shutting us down and careening our country towards a first-ever default. Democrats will be united in supporting the passage of the CR. It's the right thing to do for the American people, and it would immediately stop these unnecessary crises that are knocking at our doorstep. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters in a legislative body is how you vote. That is the most important thing we do. There are many other important things, but that is the one that matters the most. It's what our constituents sent us here to do. Now, Senate Democrats have said repeatedly that they're all for avoiding a government shutdown. They have said repeatedly that the debt ceiling must be raised. So I want to offer a novel suggestion. If Republicans want to avoid default, then they should vote yes. If the Republicans want to keep the government open, they should vote yes. But incredibly, Leader McConnell's spinning a tale, a web of subterfuge, deception, and outright contradictions, has said that he is going to vote no, and he urges Republicans to vote no. This is Alice in Wonderland logic. Republicans claim to oppose a default, but they're saying they're going to vote for one anyway. They say they oppose a government shutdown, but they're going to vote for one anyway. They say they want disaster relief, but they say they're going to oppose it when the time comes. So they can resort to all the sophistry they want. But if they vote no, the Republican Party will be solidifying itself as the party of default, and the American people, unfortunately, will be the ones footing the bill, a high cost to pay for Republican games, political games. By voting to default, the Republicans would be telling the American people they're fine if people don't get their Social Security checks. They're saying they don't care if our veterans are denied benefits. They're saying they don't care if the markets come crashing down, hurting people's pensions and IRAs. Now, none of this is an exaggeration. Economist Mark Zandi, a former advisor to the late Senator McCain, wrote recently that a default would be, quote, a catastrophic blow to the nascent economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. He also warned that Americans would pay for this default for generations. I hope my Republican colleagues heard the last part as they are thinking of indulging in the political game put forward by Leader McConnell. Americans would pay for this default for generations. Of course, we all know by now that the Republican justifications for opposing raising the debt ceiling are entirely bunk. They say they're opposed to new spending, but the Wall Street Journal has said raising the debt limit wouldn't facilitate future spending, and Congress would still need to raise the debt limit this fall, even if no major spending programs are enacted. Do you hear that, Republicans? This is the Wall Street Journal. Even if not a single new spending program were enacted, we'd still have to raise the debt that was incurred by President Trump and by all of your votes. How crass can you be? How heartless can you be? You voted to spend these monies. because of COVID. It was a valid reason. And now you don't want to pay for it. And you come up with some lame political sophistry as to trying to justify it, but everyone sees through that, everyone. The truth is, we'll be voting to pay for the debt accrued under presidents of both parties, including the $8 trillion added to the debt under President Trump. Both sides incurred the debt, both sides should pay it. It wasn't long ago that threatening a default on national debt was something you only heard in the fringes of the Republican Party. About 10 years ago, the Republican speaker at the time called the idea, quote, insanity. But today it's literally the party line, a sad commentary on just how far down the rabbit hole the Republican Party has gone. If my Republican colleagues disagree, they have a simple option. They can vote yes to keep the government open. They can vote yes on suspending the debt limit. It's in their hands. But if Republican votes favor a shutdown and default, the American people will see exactly who's responsible for throwing our country into crisis. On nominations. Now, on the activity happening on the floor today, thanks to the political stunts of a handful of obstructionist Republicans, the Senate is going to spend a lot of extra time today on something that's generally a routine process, confirming uncontroversial but critical nominees to the Department of State and other important agencies. Of all the mandates of the government, there's one that holds importance above all others: keeping the American people safe from all threats, foreign and domestic. To fulfill this responsibility, the President relies on a vast army of dedicated public servants across the government. They are the expert diplomats, undersecretaries, and assistant secretaries whom we rarely hear of in the news, but they play an indispensable role in keeping America safe. Oftentimes, there are quiet heroes. But today, an alarming number of posts essential for our national security remain vacant because a handful of Republicans have decided to hijack the confirmation process and put a hold on not just a few, but on many critical nominees. As a result, today we're going to have to take the long way to move forward with 7 of the nominees currently on hold. We need to get these confirmed as soon as possible. And if the irrational stonewalling of by Republicans of these non-controversial nominees continues, we may need to take this tedious exercise again and at greater magnitude. The Republicans responsible for holding up these confirmations are deliberately making the American people less safe in a vain and futile effort to enhance their own political fortunes. Every single one of these nominees was reported out of committee with bipartisan support. There's no rational basis for their delay. The fleeting gain these Republicans receive will pale in comparison to the damage they're causing to our country. It's not just an issue of a few nominees here and there. This is scores of diplomats and other public servants who are unable to get to work because a few members of this body are holding everything up. It's intentional sabotage of this chamber's operation, and it's going to hurt our government's ability to respond to crises around the world. Imagine if you dial 911, but nobody's been hired to pick up the phone on the other side. That's more or less what these Republicans are doing to many of our diplomats, who are often the first line of defense when an international crisis breaks out. Of course, this chamber, under this leadership, is not going to tolerate a few members who want to muck up the confirmation process to make a scene. It'll just take a little longer to get them done. Maybe nights, maybe weekends. We will focus today on pushing these nominees through for the sake of our national security. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.